Hey guys, and we are back for the last talk, for the last speech we're gonna have on the Queen stage today. We're gonna have a lot more tomorrow and day after tomorrow. And now I'm sitting almost next to Jennifer Wadella. Hello, say hi. I see a wave.
Hi.
Yeah, and she's gonna talk about leadership without paycheck, which is, well, sounds like story of many of our lives, I guess. So Jennifer has been writing code since before she realized it was a credible career path. I mean, that's a hobby. Okay, that sounds nice. She currently works as a JavaScript consultant and loves building performant web applications, speaking at technical conferences, as she does now, and brewing kombucha. Yes, that's another hobby of yours. I also know she has a dog that might interrupt this speech at any time. And if we can see it after the speech, it would be also amazing. I know our audience loves dogs. And well, Jennifer is an active member of the KC Tech community and the founder of Kansas City Women in Technology, an organization aimed at growing the number of women in technology career in Kansas City, as the name says. She's a She's the PopCon Sydney 2018 champion, a Silicon Prairie Champion Award nominee, Rising Trendsetter STEMI Award winner, and is apparently Missouri's coolest woman according to Pure Wow. So all the titles, and now let's see what she will tell us. The stage is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That was a great introduction. Makes me feel a little bit less alone in the void of just speaking into a web camera, but this is our new normal. So I hope you all are having a great conference so far. This is my first time at Build Stuff. I've heard amazing things over the year. So excited to be here, if only in a kind of virtual capacity. Today I'm going to be talking about leadership without a paycheck. I already had a great introduction, but again, my name is Jennifer Wadella. If you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter at OMG it's Fetty. I'm the director of Angular development at a consulting firm called Bitovi. We specialize in JavaScript development, and I manage all our Angular projects. I'm an Angular Google developer expert, international speaker, and as mentioned, kombucha brewing crazy plant lady. I've become an excessive plant lady due to quarantining. I think I'm like at 36 houseplants or something ridiculous right now. So gotta love all the quarantine hobbies we've started to keep our sanity. But kind of getting into what I want to talk about today. You may have heard this quote before: "People don't quit jobs; they quit bosses." And I think this is very true. It's been true for myself as an employee. It's been true for myself as an employer. And so when I talk about the premise of this talk, it's leadership without a paycheck. And this has largely come from my learnings of running a nonprofit volunteer group called Kansas City Women in Technology. I've done this for about 7 years now. And when I say leadership without a paycheck, I mean, what is it like to lead a team when they don't have a paycheck sticking around? So with Kansas City Women in Technology for 7+ years, I've managed a team of probably over at least 50 volunteers. That team has scaled up and down in size over time. But that means these were people who were just volunteering because they cared about the mission and they cared about the vision of the organization and what we were trying to do. And they didn't have any reason to stick around beyond what our organization can offer. And because it is a volunteer organization, a lot of that stemmed from what we could offer as leadership. And I've made a lot of mistakes throughout the years that have been really valuable learning lessons. And just really gotten a good understanding of what it means to lead people. And one of the cool things about leading without people sticking around for a paycheck is your successes and your losses are magnified. A lot of times, if you are not performing well as a boss or a leader, and things you may not even be aware of, people may never tell you because their paycheck is on the line. They don't want to lose their livelihood. And when you're in a volunteer organization, that goes out the window. People will quit simply because they don't like the way you lead, and they will not be afraid to give you that feedback in most scenarios. So it's almost like an expedited path to learning and figuring out what people really think and what people really care about, and how that needs to impact the way you lead. So that was very much the premise of creating this talk, is taking this view of leadership of what can you do if you don't have salary to negotiate against people, like what do you need to do as a leader to keep people around just because they want to be on your team? And there are a lot of leadership resources out there. I want to mention a couple of my favorites that I've just seen or heard reference to over the years. 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is talked about a lot. The concept of servant leadership and kind of the article that came from. And Radical Candor is one of the newer books to the playground. But these are three resources that I look to a lot, that I see resonate what I've experienced and resonate what I would like to emulate in leadership. So I kind of wanted to review some of those resources with you because I feel like they are a really good starting point for building out your leadership skills. So if we start with the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, this is by John C. Maxwell. Pretty old book, but still stands over time. And the idea of this book is these 21 laws of leadership, what it means to be a true leader. And when we say leader, this is somebody who has the ability to influence people and really make things happen versus somebody who has an authoritarian title. And orders people around, because in most cases that's not effective. So if we briefly talk through some of these, the first law is the law of the lid, and this references a leadership or a leader's lid, their capping out point of their own abilities. And it's the idea that a leader's team will always be limited based on their ability to lead. And so the idea here is to exemplify good leadership, you want to make sure that you are always learning and growing and increasing your own lid, because that's the only way to increase the capacity of your team. Our next law is the law of influence, and this is the ability to essentially influence others to achieve the results you want. And so the idea behind this is a good leader is going to use influence and motivating people over, direct ordering them around or things like that. The true power of leadership comes from the ability to make things happen just by influencing people and having them perform of their own accord. The next is the law of process. I'm a huge fan of process. I think process is one of the best tools that we have in our back pocket to allow team members to automate autonomously, which is increasingly important in software development. But in this regard, the law of process returns to kind of the learning process and self-discipline of making sure that as leaders, we are always doing what we can to grow our own skills, grow our own understanding, grow our own leadership abilities, and having a real process around that. Next up is the law of navigation. And so if you think about steering a ship, which is maybe a weird reference because I can't say I've ever steered a ship, but we've all seen enough Pirates of the Caribbean movies. But it's the idea of, in order to navigate successfully, you have to first have a vision of where you're going. You have to be aware of potential roadblocks, be aware of potential things that might block your team in order to help your team navigate successfully and get to where you want to go. So being able to have that understanding and then relay that back to your team within the navigation process is key to leadership. Next law is the law of addition. This is something that I have found to be one of the most powerful things in my leadership experience. Leadership is the act of focusing on advancing others and not just ourselves. I feel like we've seen people in leadership roles who maybe are in it for the sake of their own ego, for the sake of title or things like that. And they tend to largely be unsuccessful versus the leaders who take this approach of law of addition and raising others around them are really able to make some remarkable things happen. And I've always been aware, just as a leader, that I am a one single person and I cannot solve every problem in the world. And the best thing that I can do is to empower the others around me and the others on my team to be able to perform to their best abilities, because that's when we'll really make some amazing things happen. So you may have heard of a workshop called Django Girls. It's a global nonprofit. It was started by a couple of women to basically create a bootstrap workshop to create women how to build websites in Django. Django is a Python framework. And so they created this really amazing bootstrap material. And a couple of years ago, we decided, Kansas City Women in Technology, my nonprofit, that it would be a great idea to run a Django Girls event. And so I kind of ran everything the first year and it went okay. But the next year I was like, this is a lot of work. I think it would really benefit from having like an entire team behind it running this process. So I built up a team. And it was really amazing what this team was able to achieve, just kind of based on that groundwork and based on me allowing them to kind of take their own ideas, take their own thoughts and how they wanted to do things. So we had, I think our attendee count doubled in size. I think the first year it was 50. And then I think the second year it ran, we had at least 100 applicants. Also, the mentors that were interested in volunteering with the program doubled in size. The team brought in a lot of really cool activities, made a lot of really awesome things happen based on learning. And so that was one of the first moments in my leadership career that this really clicked, is how much more powerful it is to focus on the law of addition and focus on those around you, because you can make a lot of amazing things happen. The next law is the law of solid ground, and this has to do with kind of your character and your integrity as a leader. Because as a leader, you are very much under the microscope, whether you want to be or not. People are going to be looking at you. They're going to be looking at your actions, and if they feel like your actions don't line up with your words or your value system, it's going to call into question their ability to trust you. And so, as leaders, we need to be very aware of what we are doing, and not only what we're doing, but how we are being perceived. We're kind of in a rough time right now where there's a lot of civil unrest, like America is a great example of this. And we kind of have this recurring theme where there are a lot of people who don't understand the experiences of others. And they might misstep. They might say something that they don't realize has a negative impact on others. And to be able to understand that impact you're having and then walk back, apologize, and make lessons learning, that's a very good example of character. And that's the kind of thing that when you are a leader, you are in the spotlight and people are going to be watching you, seeing how you're reacting to things, and then deciding whether that lines up with their own personal value system. So it's important to be aware of the law of solid ground and how your actions, your words, and your perceived integrity affects the people around you. That very much leads into the next law, which is the law of respect. That we must be worthy of respect if we want people to respect us. And this is something I believe wholeheartedly. Is I have definitely been in situations before where I have been under the lead of somebody else who I absolutely have not respected because I didn't think that their actions entitled them to any respect. And it definitely influenced how much I was willing to work for them or be a collaborative team member. So I'll talk a lot about building trust and building respect later on this talk, but I think it is a very important law to be aware of as far as leadership goes. The eighth law is the law of intuition. And this is something that I feel like especially women struggle with in the workplace because we are constantly doubting ourselves. We've kind of been raised in an environment where we've told maybe what we think isn't true, what we think doesn't matter. But intuition is an incredibly important leadership skill. Intuition is kind of drawing on everything that you've learned, everything that you've experienced with, and making the best, most astute decisions you can make based off that. And a lot of times intuition has to do with understanding people and the way they're interacting. There have been situations before where I've started to see behavior from an individual that definitely pointed down the path of them not being a collaborative team member, them causing problems with other team members. And I've learned, like, as soon as I can read that in a person and my intuition starts kicking in about something, the sooner I jump in to try and rectify the situation, the better it is. So I would definitely say as a leader, you need to trust your intuition, you need to trust your instincts. But one of the things you should also be doing is making sure that you're challenging yourself, that you may not have unchecked biases that are leading to that. So there's a balance between understanding your own intuition and making sure that it's not based on preconceived notions, or if it is, making sure that you're constantly challenging those so you're not replicating bad behavior. The next law is the law of magnetism, and this simply says that good leaders are magnets. People are drawn to them. People are attracted to them. And I think this is very, very true. In my own leadership experience, I've seen the effect of people being drawn to me for a variety of reasons, and when it's led to the success of our organization. And I've also seen that magnetism has gone up and down based on the amount of emotional energy that I'm putting into a project. Working with a volunteer organization, it's not like a real job. You can't be on 100%. And so I definitely know that when I'm in and I'm fully engaged, that magnet is working really strong, versus when I'm not as engaged, that magnetic effect kind of scales back. So just be aware of yourself and the way people are reacting to you. Are they drawn to you? Are they engaging with you? Are they, trying to emulate things that you're saying, that kind of thing, and just be conscious of what you can do to increase your magnetism. The next law is the law of connection. And so this covers a couple different things. First, it covers real human connection between you and the people that you're interacting with, making sure you understand them, who they are as people. But I think another important thing to do as a leader is to be able to be at a 20,000-foot view and kind of see different things and build connections for people that can't see them themselves. A lot of times people are very focused on their tunnel vision work and exactly what's going on there, and they aren't able to make those connections for themselves. So one of the great things you can do as a leader is have that very high view of things and then help people connect the dots for themselves. Law 11 is the law of the inner circle. And this basically says, those around us, those in our inner circle are going to define who we are. One of the things that I've always placed very high importance on as a leader is because I do have that magnetism effect. I make sure that I have people in my inner circle who aren't necessarily affected by that magnetism to the extent that they won't tell me when I'm wrong or when I'm off base. So I think it's really important to have an inner circle of people that you can bounce ideas off of who aren't either revering you or scared of you, who will give you their thoughts and opinions to make sure that you are staying balanced and in check. The next law is the law of empowerment. And I'm a big fan of this, especially in software engineering, because we are software engineers, we're happiest when we can be autonomous and kind of putting out and in charge of the way we're building things. And so I think it's really important as a leader to empower those around us. So sometimes this does mean creating process. Sometimes this does mean doing some of the hard work to get things really settled. So then team members can empower themselves to do whatever they want. Next, we have the law of the picture. And when you're a leader, it's really important to create some sort of picture, some sort of vision that people want to work towards. People are very visual, and especially if they are lacking all the top level insight that you have, they might not have an understanding of where you're trying to get to. So the better you can do as a leader to paint a picture of the direction you're moving towards, what you're trying to accomplish, the more the team is going to be capable of getting there. This also includes getting their buy-in. So the next law is the law of buy-in. A team is going to be much more successful if the leader can get buy-in of everybody on the team working towards the same vision. This is kind of interesting in the nonprofit space in the volunteer world. My organization is trying to get more women to tech careers in Kansas City. And unfortunately, there's no one silver bullet to improve the diversity in tech issue. And so the team is always having a bunch of different ideas. And these are all really, really great, viable ideas. But one of the things that I had to do as a leader is make sure that we weren't trying to do too many things differently and focusing on just a few different things we could do well. And so part of that means getting buy-in from the team, but making sure people who are bringing ideas to the table don't feel like they've lost their autonomy if that idea isn't chosen and that they still have buy-in. Next is the law of victory, and this is the idea that leaders have a true passion for victory or winning or making something happen. And this doesn't mean like winning a battle of like he said, she said, or something like that. That means working towards a goal and achieving it and making that happen for the team. And I think this is really important to understand as a software leader, because you can get on these projects sometimes that drag on and on and on, and you really never see anything go live. You don't see it get into the hands of the users, and that is a little demotivating for the team members. So to be a good leader, you must really work relentlessly towards that victory, that sense of accomplishment for your team. The next law is the law of big momentum. And momentum is this idea of like, it's hard to push something and get it moving. But once it's moving, it's much easier to keep it moving and have it pick up momentum as well. And this is very true when you have people excited, when you have people passionate, when you have people motivated, they're able to accomplish a lot more, accomplish things a lot better as long as you're keeping up this momentum. And if that momentum stops, it's much harder to get started again. So it's something to be cognizant of in the tone of your team and the way you're prioritizing things and getting them excited. There's also the law of priorities, which I've kind of already touched on again, is with my nonprofit, we would have a lot of great ideas of how to solve issues and things like that. But a big part of that was prioritizing, figuring out what was going to return the best value and make sure we're focusing on that versus being very, very scattered. So it's important as a leader to set priorities. And this, draws back to this big picture of what your team is trying to do and making sure everybody's on the same page. There is the law of sacrifice, and this is leaders trading freedom for responsibility. And so one of the hard things to do as a leader, and especially in the software development sphere, is to give over control to your team because you can't do everything. So there is a level of trust that you have to have in your team to be able to give up and let them do things and take things on. This also means, sometimes you're going to sacrifice your own career ambitions to help elevate your team members. And I do think that is good leadership there. There's law of timing. And so this is understanding when things are going on, when it makes sense to execute on something, whether it's taking a risk, whether it's pulling back the reins and kind of reining things in. I am at a consulting company for my full-time job. And so law of timing is a very big thing. Okay, like when are we going to hire, especially in the midst of a pandemic? Like how are we going to balance that between the projects that we're taking on, things like that. This also leads back into law of intuition. You have to have this kind of robust understanding of your collective experiences and be aware that timing is a powerful tool to get your team to execute in the way you want. There's the law of explosive growth. And this is the idea that good leaders are going to create larger groups of good leaders. And I can say this is true, from my volunteer experiences when I've spent time really investing in leaders and letting them build out their own skill sets. We've been able to grow into a lot more as an organization. And that's very much a ripple effect is when you start that from the top, it spreads and keeps self-perpetuating. Another really good example of this is when you're leading by example. We've always been a very diversity focused organization, obviously, but we believe that diversity means more than just white women. And if you're aware of any of the unrest in America, particularly with the shootings of Black Americans, I was very proud to have a team that really, without any pushing from me, was posting out really great content on our social, drawing awareness to the movements. And that kind of growth, that kind of autonomy can really only happen if you've planted the seeds to grow and have people emulate those ideas. And the final law is the law of legacy. And this is the idea that true leaders leave a really great impression on the people that they lead. They leave people that would love to work for them again, that want to emulate their style, that want to be like them. And I think this is really important to kind of be the kind of leader that you would want and the kind of leader that will really impact people that help change their lives for the better. So that's kind of a brief summary of the 21 laws of leadership. I think these just all hold true for everything that I've ever experienced. And so it's kind of a good check-in to do every so often is just to re-review this list, kind of reflect back on your leadership journey, but think, okay, what of these laws can I improve on personally? The next kind of leadership book or leadership piece I hear a lot about, and that I think a lot of people try and emulate, is this idea of servant leadership that came from this 1970 essay by Robert Greenleaf. And the idea is leaders being servant first, focusing on the needs of others before your own. And there are a couple guiding principles here. And the laws of leadership were kind of very overall talking about you as a leader. And I feel like the guiding principles of servant leadership tend to focus more on the people that you're interacting with and talking about the importance of listening to your team members, having empathy for your team members, being aware of healing your team members might need to do. I'll talk a little bit about job trauma that we all have later. Having self-awareness as a leader, understanding your impact on others, the importance of persuasion, the importance of conceptualization. This is very much like the law of picture, foresight, having an understanding, using your intuition to see problems that your teams might run into, a software roadblock or whether it's some sort of friction on the team, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, and building community. If you haven't heard of Radical Candor, I think this is like my go-to leadership book that's a recommendation this day. It's written by Kim Scott. And the idea of radical candor is finding a communication style that is really good for your team. And so radical candor is what we should be striving for. The word candor meaning being very open and just very clear about what your expectations are. And there are some kind of other things that you want to stay away from. And she talks about these different examples. So one of them would be ruinous empathy. And this is where you are so empathetic to a team member that you are not giving them feedback that they really need to grow that can in turn be disastrous to them. And I know this has been, really true for my leadership career. Is I remember situations earlier on where I just didn't feel comfortable giving feedback with people that I know they didn't want to hear because they were particularly sensitive individuals. And it ended up that they would continue to repeat catastrophic behavior that was really destructive to some of the communities I've built. So the idea of being so empathetic to the point that you're being ruinous and not giving really good constructive feedback and making sure your team is moving in the right direction is terrible. There's also manipulative insincerity, where you are just trying to you're not caring about the person, you're just trying to manipulate them to get the result you want, which oftentimes people pick up on very, very easily, and it leads to a lot of mistrust because they don't understand your intentions. Or there's also obnoxious aggression. And this is where, instead of being thoughtful about your feedback or thoughtful about the way you're approaching an individual, it comes off very aggressive. It's all about you, and will often trigger defensiveness in that individual. So the idea with radical candor is to really care about the person, but make it clear to them and to yourself that part of your caring for them is to challenge them and give them feedback that will help them move in a great direction. Uh, and I would like to say that I think there are a lot of really great leadership books. I think there are a lot of really less than great leadership books. Dave Ramsey is a big finance guy in the States. If you haven't heard of him before, he's a sales guy. And at one point in my life, I was recommended to read his book, Entree Leadership. And I swear to you, within like the first chapter of this book, like I was like almost vomiting because I could not stand what he was saying. His entire premise of this Entree Leadership book is he's this outstanding sales guy. He's this amazing entrepreneur. How does he create people that act exactly like him because he can't trust them if they don't? And this pretty much, in my opinion, breaks any good law of leadership that we've talked about so far, which includes like autonomy and allowing people to grow. Not to mention just like the insane ego of thinking that you're the best thing on the face of the planet and the best solution is to make people act exactly like you. I can't get behind this theory at all. Like, when time and time again in my leadership career, when I have taken the approach of encouraging people to be autonomous and figure things out on their own and bring their own thoughts and ideas to the table, like they have far surpassed anything that I could ever do or think of as a certain individual. And not to mention like just subtle sexism throughout his book. So I just want to say, like, there's a lot of really great leadership resources out there. There's some that I would definitely caution you against taking with any sense of practicality. Because in the good books I've read, there are a lot of common threads. And the first one is humility as a leader. Understanding that you have limitations, and that you are not the best thing to happen to the face of software engineering. Having self-awareness, understanding your impact on others, understanding what your role is as a leader and how that plays into team performance. Choosing influence over authority, understanding how people work, figuring out how to influence them, how to motivate them, how to keep them passionate about what you're working on, instead of just brazen authority. Relying on intuition and learned experience, making sure that you are always, challenging yourself, reflecting back on things that you've experienced and making the best decisions you can based on that data, but then also making sure that you are constantly questioning everything you've learned and constantly being aware of things that are changing. The importance of growth and autonomy of team members for really explosive growth or scalability. The point here is just strike a balance in the content you read. In my opinion, nothing is going to teach you better than experience, but having an understanding of different scenarios as different scenarios approach will help you a lot. In a lot of these leadership books, like I will go back to continuously, because sometimes it's just nice to have that reminder and that check-in and kind of evaluate the way I'm doing things against the way I think things should be done. So if I were to kind of like distill a lot of what I've learned from leading a team without having a paycheck on the line, these are kind of the 30 things I would factor into being important to focus on. And the first one is building a team. What goes into creating a team of people that's going to work well together, and what goes into that. Building trust within that team, and what you need to do to keep that team happy, and then building a growth culture. So it's not enough to just be a leader and have a team, but what can you do to keep that team moving when you're no longer around? So first of all, if we talk about building a team, let's start with the interview process. And it's interesting because we, as a volunteer nonprofit, you kind of just would think we'd take anybody that would come. But with our nonprofit, we have a lot of different things that we do. So a really good example is one of our programs called Coding and Cocktails. And so this is a monthly class teaching women how to code. And that does mean we need people to be there every month who are going to be dedicated to making sure that the presentations are ready to go and that attendee questions are answered, that our scholarship program is being managed. So we have people applying for diversity scholarships so they can attend for free, making sure that we have food lined up with our caterer, everything like that. And so these are real responsibilities that we needed to check our volunteers for. So a good thing to do is ask, like, why did they want the job? First of all, this is to kind of check their engagement of if they're going to be a good fit for your company. With my volunteer organization, it was really good for us to understand what they were kind of looking to get out of this volunteer experience. A lot of them just wanted leadership experience and couldn't get that at work. Some of them wanted it as a resume booster. Some of them wanted to network. But it's a good idea to understand their motivations, and not only that, but to be able to deliver on what they want to get out of the job as a leader. Sometimes you do have to specifically ask, okay, what are they hoping to get out of this? When I'm leading my team at work as a consultant, it's important to say, are they looking for growth? What are their career goals? What are their aspirations, to make sure I'm aware of that. It's also important to understand how people handle conflict. We say all the time, software development isn't really about code, it's about people. And this is really, really true. And the hardest problems you're going to have to solve are going to be around people and are going to be around conflict. So having an understanding of how your team members handle conflict is really, really important. There are some people that are going to be able to grow and that are going to be able to, be cohesive team members. And there are some people that just have a severe learning block, and they're going to refuse to learn how to manage conflict in a way that's effective. And so asking questions like this can help you sense that. And how do they solve hard problems? Are they the kind of person that's going to get frustrated? Do they have a bunch of resources? Are they comfortable asking for help? These are probing questions that I like a lot, just to get a sense of kind of the individual, the way they work, and if they're going to be a good fit for the team. And when we talk about being a good fit for the team, one thing I'd like to express is the importance of culture add over culture fit. Culture fit we've heard about for years. You want to make sure people are going to be cohesive in the team. But this kind of mentality is why we have a vast majority of all white male software development teams, is they're looking for a bunch of guys that they can bro out with. We have started to adopt this term instead of culture add. People that, will bring something new, bring something great to that culture without being a carbon copy. And this is how we're really going to create diversity of thought. This is how we're going to create robust teams that are bringing really great ideas to the table. That we're focusing on, what can this person bring? What can this person, teach us? What can they share with us that we may not be aware of already? Another part of building a team is optimizing the onboarding process. And I feel like this really went true for managing a volunteer organization where we were all doing this part-time. And so having a really optimized onboarding process to let them be effective as quickly as possible is important. But as many of us are working in a remote environment now, I think this is equally as important in like a real world software setting. So this means, having equipment and tools and documentation at the ready for them. Like, do they have everything that they need to start being effective immediately? Do they have appropriate access to whatever they need? Do they have, email credentials set up, that kind of thing? Personnel introductions. Do they know who to go to ask questions about time codes? Do they know which members of the client they can approach? Which team members can they ask technical questions to? Who can they ask about deployments? So being very aware and cognizant of all this information that your new team members need is a really important part of building that team and making them happy. People are eager and they're excited to contribute. And so if your focus when building a team is being able to get your personnel as autonomously operational as soon as possible, the happier they're going to be able to prove their value, to prove their worth to your organization. There's nothing more frustrating than like being really excited to start making things happen and then just being completely roadblocked simply because your leader doesn't have a good process on board to help you work. Another part of building a team is understanding when people aren't a good fit for your team. And this is a really great quote. It's better to have a hole in your team than an asshole in your team. And I really think this is true. A lot of times we're kind of like scrambling to put people on projects or something like that. But somebody who is not a good fit, somebody who is going to be destructive towards other team members, ends up being way more of a time suck, way more of an emotional energy suck. And so I would advise you to not be afraid to get rid of assholes on your team because they will slow productivity. You will lose good people. We've seen this time and time again. I'd also encourage you to resist homogeny. I talked a little bit about culture ad over culture fit earlier, but I feel like it's very easy to get like infatuated by this idea of a lot of people on your team sharing commonalities. I remember I worked at this remote company a couple of years back, and the CEO was just like a raging narcissist. She was a piece of work, but it was definitely a red flag to me when they would like get really excited about all these commonalities at the company. Oh, we have so many people who do this very specific like musical thing. And it was really funny because that company culture was very much like if you weren't emulating exactly what the CEO said, you were likely to get fired. And so it was very much like group think was the only accepted thing. And you really don't get any diversity of thought that way. If anybody is too scared to bring an idea to the table because it's not within the group or within this very homogenous way of thinking, um, it's very detrimental. So when building a team, uh, be aware of your homogeny. Um, it's also important to understand the motivations of your team member. I talked a little bit about this during the interview process. Um, but being aware of your team members, what motivates them, what they're looking for, what they're trying to get out of the job, is a good way for you to understand them, help them work better together with their peers, and be more functional. So the next kind of big lesson I have is the idea of building trust. The truth is trust is hard to build, and it's very, very easy to break. And as a leader, you are under the microscope. All of your actions are under the microscope. And the second somebody feels like your words or your actions aren't aligning with what they think they should be, you can lose their trust. So one of the best ways to maintain trust is to establish really clear lines of communication. Make it very clear for how your team can approach you, and provide more than one method because we all have different communication styles. A very harsh lesson I had learned in managing Casey Witt is had brought on a leader, and she had definitely been not doing a great job, had been failing last minute on events, so we were kind of like scrambling to cover for her. And there were definitely a lot of problems going on. And I had hesitated to address it directly with her, but it got to the point where it was becoming very apparent to other team members that she was not doing what she was supposed to, and it was causing some really bad problems for the program. And she started to sense this, and so in the middle of a leadership meeting, she emailed the entire Casey Witt team, and it was basically 5 paragraphs about why I was the shittiest person on the face of the planet, why I was the shittiest leader. And a lot of things. A lot of it was just her fluff or pointing fingers, but clearly every paragraph she had been triggered by something very specific. And so that was a really important lesson to me that I needed to do a better job checking in with my team to make sure that if they had concerns with me, they had a safe way to express it. And so that led to me basically changing kind of the way I did things. I would tell my team after every meeting and in every email I sent, hey, if you ever want to discuss something, whether it's you're not okay with something I'm doing, something like that, here's my email address, here's my calendar link. Another important thing for building trust is getting comfortable explaining your thought process. When you're relying on your intuition because you've done this a long time, you have this oversight that a lot of people may not. It's easy to kind of like shut down an idea and move on because it won't work. But the optics to your team, they don't see all that process going on. So the more you can explain your past experiences and your thought process to the team to help them learn and understand how you're reaching that decision, the more trust you will build with your team. Kind of going back to that open communication, I'm a really big fan of having an open calendar policy. And I feel like that in our remote world, this is the new open door policy. So giving your team members like full autonomy to say, hey, you need something from me, go throw that on my calendar. Let them schedule meetings with you whenever they want, can really be helpful. It's also really important to make sure that when you're getting this feedback from your team, you're acting on it whenever possible. I see time and time again when people are expressing feedback to leaders and then nothing happens. And they're like, well, why do I even bother? That leader is breaking their trust. When giving feedback to your team, it's important to tailor the feedback method to the individual. This is another book that I recommend time and time again. This is called Thanks for the Feedback. And this is absolutely the best book I've read, about how to give and receive feedback. Would recommend this to everybody, regardless of leadership status or not. And then when it comes to relaying feedback, a precursor to that is making sure that you're setting really clear expectations with your team. it's also good to be aware that we all have job trauma from past jobs, and that can be preventing your team from meeting your expectations. And so having that empathy, being aware of what their past jobs have taught them is important. And then our final lesson is how to build a growth culture. And so one of the biggest takeaways I've learned is to learn how to balance servant leadership. And so servant leadership is again, the idea of making sure that your team can do everything they need, putting their priorities first. But I learned the hard way that I have been a snowplow parent in the past when it comes to leadership, and this means I have been so insistent on removing all roadblocks from my team that I have removed their ability to learn from struggles. And so I think it's really important to learn to balance servant leadership with letting your team face some hard problems that they need to learn and grow into being good leaders on their own. That very much goes into prioritizing, allowing autonomy. Just do everything you can to make sure that processes are in place where your team can execute with limited oversight from you or having you to hold their hands. Definitely don't shy away from hard conversations, and that includes praising in public, criticizing in private. I always, in a group setting, make sure that I am never casting something that can be perceived as criticism on a team member. And finally, be aware that there are some battles that you just cannot win. For a long time in my leadership path, I thought that every problem could be solved, any personnel problem, anybody could be coached. And I've learned over time that is not true. There are some people that are unwilling to learn, or they are at a point in their life where they're just unwilling to learn. And so being aware that not every situation is fixable, I think is a big takeaway that I've learned from my time. So kind of in summary, I want to iterate the importance of, again, humility, understanding your limitations, self-awareness, understanding your impact on others, prioritizing influence over authority, not shying away from your intuition and your learned experience, but making sure that you're always challenging those and any unconscious biases you might have. And understanding the importance of growth and autonomy in your team, and always prioritizing creating a way for your team members to be able to grow and operate as they need to. I think we have just a little bit of time for questions. These slides will be available at leadershipwithoutapaycheck.jenniferwadella.com.
Okay, thank you very much. We indeed do have a few minutes for questions, and that's very good because we have quite a few questions.
Oh, okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, so short answers. Let's try to give one question like 30 seconds. But Evaldas is asking, any suggestions how to detect assholes before hiring them?
So big part of your intuition will come into play is you will start to notice asshole behaviors or asshole warning signs throughout your career. And so the more you can be honed into the kind of behaviors people try to do before then, the faster you can detect it. But one thing to look out for is the victim mindset, because I feel like a lot of assholes will always feel like something happened to them, or for some reason they're the victim in their own narrative. And so when you're asking about how they solve conflict or how they deal with difficult problems, if they are putting themselves in the victim place in every story, that would be something that I would look out for.
Okay, great answer. I definitely agree with that. Gabia is also asking, how long should an employee's probation period be?
It's kind of hard to ask, like probation period, like them coming on board for the first time. Because I would prefer to never hire with probation period. I would prefer to hire with somebody who I know is going to be successful long term. I will say, if you're talking about an employee that's come on, or maybe it's somebody that you weren't in charge of the hiring process, I think 3 months is normally like a reasonable behavior turnaround time, as long as you're checking in weekly and doing coaching and getting points for them to learn on, or to grow on. I've been in situations where I've kind of been coaching somebody, and when it has not turned around within 3 months, when they're still kind of repeating the same things and not seeming to make the mental shift that I need them to, that's the point where I'm like, all right, this might be a not rectifiable situation.
Okay, we have a question from Danny. He's asking about the open calendar thing that you mentioned, right? Do you mean with open calendar sharing your full agenda calendar, or what? Like, I lead a nonprofit organization, but should I share my private appointments? What do you mean?
You don't need to share your private appointments. You can just have a calendar that shows your availability. And if you're running a nonprofit, I'm going to tell you there is a tool called Calendly. And what you do is you sync it up with your internal calendar. You kind of select the spots that you want, and you can send this Calendly link to people. It's going to integrate with your calendar. It's only going to allow them to book times that you're actually available for. That was a lifesaver for me when I was doing a lot of meetings with my nonprofit. Calendly.com.
That is awesome. I don't know if everybody can hear it correctly, so maybe you can even type it in the chat or on the screen.
Can you still see my screen?
Yeah, Calendly. Okay. That seems like a good advice. Okay, and the last question from Carol goes by, how can I recognize that somebody is a good leader during recruitment conversation?
Oh, so if you're trying to make sure that you're working for a good leader, um, I think like the same applies, the same kind of interview questions. Ask how this leader handles conflict. How do they handle it between team members? Um, I think one of the warning signs of a not great leader is if they are a person to shy away from conflict because they don't want to deal with it. That's going to be something that you're going to struggle with a lot. I think it's also, you can ask questions about like what their value systems are, like what do they think, emulates a good team member. If you can ask kind of these probing questions, you can get a sense of their self-introspection. Like if you're asking these leadership value questions or even asking about like any content in this presentation, you'll be able to sense like whether they've ever given an ounce of thought to this or not. Because the best leaders are going to be the ones who are very introspective, who are very aware, and who are thinking about these things versus like, I don't know, that's a good question. For somebody who's just there with the title.
Okay, so thank you very much. We are just on time to finish this speech. Thank you very, very much. That was very interesting. And we are ending Queen stage performance today with you. I'll see you tomorrow also, but I'll be in the rockstar spotlight where I belong. So that's all. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone.